When you think of some of the most prolific and iconic hitters in baseball history, you rarely think of the great backstops who have played the game. Out of the 20 catchers who have been elected to the Hall of Fame, only 4 have hit over 350 home runs, and only one of those 4 have hit over 400 home runs. Needless to say, the most defining characteristic of catchers is not usually their offensive prowess. Catchers are typically more valued for their defensive capabilities. This is especially true in recent years. With the rise of advanced metrics, catcher defense is more valuable and quantifiable than ever before. With all that being said, what exactly makes a good defensive catcher? Arguably the most important thing is framing. Framing is something that has always existed, but has become more emphasized within the last decade or so of Major League Baseball. It might seem trivial to value something like framing so much, but think about it. Being able to steal strikes can change the entire scope of an at-bat. In 2023, if a count started 1-0, batters had a triple slash of 260, 380, 446. If a count started 0-1, they had a triple slash of 219, 266, 352. A drop in over 200 points of OPS is massive, and all that just from the simple act of framing. That's mostly what I'm going to be discussing here today. 2 players, Russell Martin and Brian McCann, and how they were both pristine at framing. I'll briefly discuss their careers, and they had very similar ones. Both were drafted in 2002, both climbed up prospect rankings for their respective teams, both managed to play for their hometown team, or in Martin's case, home country, and both returned to the team that they made their debut with to play their final seasons in 2019. And both were elite at framing. So elite at it, that it might just merit a spot in the Hall of Fame. Let me explain. Let's start with a short overview of how Russell Martin got to the major leagues. Martin was drafted out of Chippewa College in the 17th round of the 2002 draft as an infielder. In rookie ball, he played most of his games at third base. It wasn't until the next year, in 2003, that he was converted to a full-time catcher due to the suggestion of the scout that signed him. There were certainly growing pains, such as his 27 pass balls for the rookie league Ogden Raptors, but he improved each year. Going into the 2006 season, Martin was ranked as the 4th highest prospect in the Dodgers organization and the 42nd highest in all of baseball, according to Baseball America, who wrote this of him. He's comfortable behind the plate, and his blocking and receiving skills are advanced for such an inexperienced catcher. Martin started the 2006 season in AAA Las Vegas. He hit really well in AAA, with a batting average just below 300 and an OPS over 800. Then, after Dodgers catcher Deoner Navarro suffered a wrist contusion, Martin was called up and made his debut on May 5, 2006. Martin never looked back once he made his debut. He played in 121 games and put up a triple slash of 282, 355, 436, which produced an OPS plus of 101. A brief overview of OPS plus, if you're unfamiliar with what it is that it's a stat that looks at a player's OPS and normalizes it throughout the league based on the offensive environment that season and on park factors. 100 is always average, anything higher than 100 is better, and anything lower is worse. In this case, Martin had an OPS plus of 101, meaning he was 1% better than the average hitter that season, so essentially a league average hitter. I really want to emphasize his on-base percentage of 355. This would be really good for any hitter, but it's especially impressive for a catcher, and even more so for a rookie catcher. A reason for this high of an on-base percentage is of course his ability to hit for average, having a 282 average, but also his impressive plate discipline. Martin posted a walk rate of 9.6%. While not elite, it was certainly above average. This impressive rookie campaign culminated in 2.4 F/WAR for Martin. To put a cherry on top of his rookie season, he stole 10 bases. In MLB history, Russell Martin is the only catcher to have both at least 10 home runs and 10 steals in his first season. It's just really impressive to see how complete Russell Martin's rookie season was. I won't go too into detail about each season of Martin's career because that isn't really the point of this video. It's about building a Hall of Fame case. We'll come back with a more in-depth look at Martin's career in a bit. But now, let's meet the other subject of the video. Brian McCann was born on February 20th, 1984 in Athens, Georgia. He was born into a baseball family of sorts, as his father, Howard, was an assistant coach for the University of Georgia baseball team when Brian was born. He later became the head coach for the baseball team at Marshall University. McCann graduated from Duluth High School in Duluth, Georgia in 2002, and passed on his commitment to play baseball at the University of Alabama when he was drafted in the second round of the 2002 draft by his hometown Atlanta Braves. McCann soared through level after level of the minor leagues. The most promising tool that he possessed was the power he brought to the batter's box. Given his burly frame and his excellent hitting abilities, it was thought that McCann could make the switch to be a permanent first baseman in his future. Though with each year in the minor leagues, McCann developed to be more and more proficient as a defensive catcher. Prior to the 2005 season, he was ranked as the number 3 Braves prospect and the number 44 prospect in all of baseball. After 48 games in AA to start 2005, the Braves rewarded him with a call-up directly to the Major League club. In his relatively small sample of 59 games at the Major League level, McCann's triple slash was 278, 345, 400, which was good for an OPS plus of 95. While he didn't display much of the power that defined him as a prospect, with only 12 extra base hits and 180 at-bats, 5 of which were home runs, it was a very promising start for a 21-year-old catcher who hadn't even played a single game in AAA. The Braves were seemingly convinced as well, as they traded away their starting catcher from the previous 2 seasons, Johnny Estrada, to the Diamondbacks, turning over the keys to Brian McCann to be the starting catcher for the foreseeable future. And in his first full season as the starting catcher, he made sure to show the Braves that they made the correct choice. Playing in 130 games in the 2006 season, McCann had an outstanding year, with a triple slash of 333, 388, 572, for an OPS plus of 143. He hit 24 home runs, 34 doubles, and drove in 93 runs. He was named an All-Star, but somehow didn't get the starting nod over Paul LaDuca for some reason, and took home the Silver Slugger Award. In MLB history, McCann is one of only 2 catchers to hit over 315 in a season and hit over 20 home runs in a season within the first 2 years of his career. The other is Mike Piazza, who did it in his age 24 season. McCann did it in his age 22 season. This resulted in an FWAR value of 4.3, tied for second with Jorge Posada among all catchers that year. I'll tell you this much, the Braves were right to not convert him into another position. I just discussed how Martin and McCann got to the majors and how they made impacts for their respective teams right away. I want to discuss one more season in their careers, their 2008 seasons. It was a breakout year for both of them, and it was the first year that Fangraphs began tracking framing. I think this season truly encapsulates everything positive about these 2 players. Russell Martin got off to a great start that year. By the end of the first half, he was slashing 294, 394, 436. Good for a 123 WRC+. This was good for the 4th highest WRC+ among catchers in the first half. There was no question that he got named to the All-Star game of the first half like that. But who had the highest WRC+ among catchers? Who else but fellow All-Star Brian McCann. His triple slash was better than Martin's in every aspect except on-base percentage. His OPS was over 100 points higher than Martin's. And that's not to undermine Martin's first half. I'm just emphasizing how massive of a first half that McCann had. Despite how good both of their first halves were, neither of them got to start in the All-Star game. Apparently, fans in 2008 thought that Giovanni Soto was a better choice to start the Midsummer Classic. Both Martin's and McCann's offensive production slowed down a bit in the second half, though they were still both capable hitters, McCann especially. By the season's end, both Martin and McCann had turned in astonishingly impressive breakout campaigns. While Martin's offensive production might not have matched McCann's, I want to point out 2 things. Martin had a ludicrous 385 on-base percentage, fueled by his incredible 13.9% walk rate. It was the 3rd highest on-base percentage among Major League catchers that year behind Joe Mauer and Chris Iannetta. Secondly, Russell Martin played in 155 games in 2008. This is much more than the average catcher plays in throughout a whole season, as catchers typically necessitate many days off throughout the season due to the physical demands of the position. Especially so when you realize that Martin played for a National League team. He didn't have the luxury of being a catcher in the American League who could be a designated hitter on his off days, which isn't uncommon among catchers who hit well. No, instead, Martin would occasionally start at third base so that his bat could stay in an otherwise subpar Dodgers lineup. Russell Martin started opening day on March 31st and played in every game, 4 of which came at third base, until June 2nd, 57 games into the season. Since 2000, Martin is one of only 2 National League catchers to play at least 155 games in a season. Just unreal availability. And you want to know the finishing touch to his season? He stole 18 bases at an efficient rate. Now over to McCann's season, and it honestly rivals his first full season in 2006. He led all Major League catchers in slugging percentage, OPS, OPS+, tied for the lead in home runs, and second most RBI. He was awarded the Silver Slugger Award for his powerful season. The most surprising thing to me is that neither of these players received a single MVP vote. And yeah, they had good seasons, sure, but trust me, it didn't compare to the MVP winner Albert Pujols and his unfathomable .462 on-base percentage and gargantuan 1114 OPS. It makes sense that he won his second MVP award that year. He absolutely deserved it. So surely McCann and Martin weren't even close to as valuable as he was, right? Wait, what? What is this? Okay, so how does this make any sense? Brian McCann as the second most valuable player in all of baseball, and Russell Martin, the 9th most valuable player in all of baseball? Both of them put up over 7 WAR. These are MVP caliber seasons that both of these players had. But they weren't otherworldly offensively in the way that players like Pujols were. So what gives? Why were Martin and McCann so insanely valuable in 2008? Well, mostly because of their stellar defense, specifically their framing. Like I mentioned previously, 2008 was the first year that Fangraphs tracked pitch framing, finally allowing us to see just how good or bad catchers really were at framing. Like many advanced defensive statistics, Fangraphs framing runs are no different. 0 is average, anything below 0 is worse, and anything above 0 is better. With that being said, Martin had 30.4 framing runs, and McCann had 34.5 framing runs. They were the best framers in the league that year by a pretty wide margin. Well, better than everyone except Jose Molina, who honestly might just be the best pitch framer of all time. Martin and McCann had better framing runs than players like Joe Mauer, Jeff Mathis, and Yadier Molina. Since Fangraphs started tracking framing, McCann's 2008 season ranks as the 2nd best framing season ever, and Martin's ranks as the 5th best season ever. Alright, so we compared Martin's and McCann's seasons to the catchers of this year, but how was their defense compared to all other position players? For this, we'll use Fangraphs defensive runs above average, or just DEF. Fangraphs defines an average defensive value of 0, -20 to be awful, and +20 to be excellent. They also say that about 10 runs are equal to 1 win. So with that context being given, Russell Martin had a defensive value of 41.1, 3rd in the majors to McCann's 44.3. And Jose Molina again? Quick side note, if Jose Molina had at least a league average bat for his career, he would be exalted to the same extent as his brother Yadier, and for good reason. He was potentially even better defensively than him. Anyway, back to McCann and Martin. The 2 most valuable everyday defensive players in 2008 were Brian McCann and Russell Martin, more valuable than players like Chase Utley, Yadier Molina, and Adrian Beltre. Both Martin's and McCann's defense alone were worth about 4 wins for their respective teams. So when you couple illustrious defense at potentially the most important position on the field with good hitting, that's how you end up with 7.3 WAR for Martin and 8.3 WAR for McCann. Now that I've adequately contextualized just how good Martin and McCann were at their peak, it's time for me to pitch their Hall of Fame case. And it's actually very interesting. Alright, so you're probably thinking, in what world are Russell Martin and Brian McCann Hall of Famers? So I'll start here. Russell Martin and Brian McCann accrued 54.5 and 52.1 F-WAR respectively throughout their career. Which, let me explain something. You might be aware that there are two types of WAR, F-WAR and B-WAR. If you go on to Baseball Reference right now and look at Martin's and McCann's pages, you'll notice that their WAR values are a lot lower than their Fangraphs WAR. And there's a simple explanation for this. Fangraphs takes into account pitch framing when calculating their WAR total. Baseball Reference doesn't. This is why not just Russell Martin and Brian McCann have a lower B-WAR than F-WAR. A lot of recent catchers who are great at framing have a lower B-WAR than F-WAR. Yadier Molina has a noticeably lower B-WAR, and so does Buster Posey. This is why I've been using exclusively F-WAR for this video. It gives a much more complete understanding to the value that a catcher, specifically catchers who have played since 2008, bring to their team. So where do Martin's and McCann's career WAR totals rank among catchers in baseball history? Among all catchers, Martin ranks 10th in F-WAR, and McCann ranks 14th. Martin is behind 7 Hall of Famers, and likely 2 soon-to-be Hall of Famers in Buster Posey and Yadier Molina, and he ranks ahead of 13 Hall of Famers. McCann isn't too far behind either, ranking just behind Joe Mauer, who just got elected on the first ballot this year, and ranks ahead of 10 Hall of Famers himself. Aside from WAR, Martin and McCann might be the best pitch framers of all time, or at the very least, certainly the best framers of their generation. Since Fangraphs began tracking framing, Russell Martin and Brian McCann rank 1st and 2nd respectively in framing runs, separated by just 0.1. They're ahead of some of the best defensive catchers in recent memory like Jeff Mathis, Austin Hedges, Buster Posey, and one spot ahead of the best defensive catcher of all time, Yadier Molina. Let's look at one more stat to contextualize just how great Martin and McCann were defensively. We're going to once again look at Fangraphs' defensive value. This time we're going to see where they line up among all position players in Major League history. In Major League history, Russell Martin ranks as the 8th most valuable defender, and Brian McCann ranks as the 13th most valuable defender. They are surrounded by some of the defensive behemoths of baseball, like Ivan Rodriguez, Cal Ripken, Luis Aparicio, and Andruw Jones. Russell Martin and Brian McCann were not just 2 of the best defending catchers of all time, they were 2 of the greatest defenders of all time in general. And you want to know the craziest thing? Russell Martin and Brian McCann have a grand total of 1 Gold Glove combined between the 2 of them, because they played a majority of their careers in the NL, overlapping with the greatest defensive catcher of all time, Yadier Molina. While Martin and McCann's defense is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for their Hall of Fame case, they were still above average hitters throughout their careers. Martin ended his career with an OPS plus of 101, and McCann ended his with an OPS plus of 110. At their peaks, however, they were some of the best hitting catchers in baseball. As a hitter, perhaps the aspect Russell Martin was best at was his patience and ability to draw walks. After signing with the Pirates prior to the 2013 season, which sparked a bit of an offensive resurgence for him, he was one of only 2 Major League catchers from 2013 to 2015 to have an on-base percentage of at least .350. Martin was also rather quick for a catcher and wasn't afraid to be aggressive on the base paths. In MLB history, Martin is one of 3 catchers to hit over 190 home runs and steal over 100 bases, alongside Hall of Famers Carlton Fisk and Ivan Rodriguez. Brian McCann, on the other hand, was much more of a masher as a catcher. From 2006 to 2016, no catcher in the majors hit more home runs than Brian McCann. He led second place, you guessed it, Russell Martin, by a pretty wide margin. From 2008 to 2011, Brian McCann was tied for second among all position players in F-WAR, just behind Albert Pujols. In terms of awards, McCann is one of only 4 catchers in Major League history to win the Silver Slugger at least 6 times. Anyway, I present all these statistics to show that, at their peak, Martin and McCann were just as good offensively as some of the best catchers of their generation, such as Joe Mauer, Buster Posey, and Yadier Molina. Speaking of those guys, the Hall of Fame cases of Mauer, Posey, and Molina are all especially interesting. All 3 of them have very similar WAR totals to Russell Martin and Brian McCann, and all of them played in the same era. Joe Mauer was just elected into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot this year. I think this helps Martin and McCann's case a bit, though if I were a betting man, I'd comfortably say that they're not getting in. The thing about Mauer, Molina, and Posey is that they're all beloved players who are synonymous with one single organization. Their footprint on the game of baseball goes beyond just their sabermetric appeal. Moreover, Martin and McCann don't really have the counting stats that other players or even other catchers have. Martin doesn't even have 1,500 hits in his career, and McCann only has 1,590. And while Posey only has 1,500 hits, again, he has much more of a reputation and legacy than Martin and McCann. Posey has a plethora of accolades, including an MVP, and he was perhaps the biggest part of a Giants dynasty that won 3 World Series. Also, Russell Martin has a career batting average of .248, which, if he were to be elected, would be the lowest of any position player in the Hall of Fame. It also doesn't help that Martin and McCann are set to hit the Hall of Fame ballot next year in 2025. Posey isn't set to hit the ballot until 2027, and Molina until 2028. If Posey and Molina were to be elected, I do think it would help the case of Martin and McCann, at least marginally. And look, whether you think framing is a sham and doesn't matter or it isn't real, is an argument for a different day. Because the fact of the matter is, framing is a massive part of catcher defense, and will continue to be so as long as human umpires are the ones calling balls and strikes. Catcher defense is a massive part of a catcher's value in WAR, and WAR is a massive part of a player's legacy and Hall of Fame candidacy. Will Russell Martin and Brian McCann be elected to the Hall of Fame? Probably not. But I'm personally of the viewpoint that the Hall of Fame would be better and more exciting with more players in it. The Hall of Fame is an institution that celebrates and gives recognition to the laborious grind of a Major League Baseball career. And I think Russell Martin and Brian McCann had careers worth celebrating.